The message arrived at 19:03 Zulu time, a precise 3-minute deviation from the established schedule that was, in itself, a signal of extreme distress. The message was not composed of words, Morse code, or encrypted data bursts. It was a message of profound and absolute silence. For the past 18 months, every Tuesday at exactly 19 Zulu, a faint looping 12-bar phrase from a Syrian folk song, Lama Bada Yatathana, had been broadcast on the shortwave frequency 17 to 810 MHz. The broadcast, originating from a Mossad signals unit camouflaged among the basalt rocks of the Golan Heights, was intentionally degraded, layered with atmospheric static, and designed to sound like an amateur enthusiast's transmission from North Africa. It was the all-clear, a digital heartbeat confirming the operational integrity of the mission codenamed Silent Scribe. Its absence was a scream tearing through the ether. In the subterranean communications hub, deep beneath the Kiryat in Tel Aviv, a signals intelligence technician named Ben Alon stared at the waterfall display on his console. The band around 17 to 810 MHz was a flat, lifeless gray, populated only by the random, crackling hiss of cosmic background radiation. He glanced at the cesium atomic clock on the wall, 1904. He had already triple-checked the frequency calibration, run a full diagnostic on the AN-URR-74 receiver array, and even cross-referenced with a sister listening post in Cyprus. The results were nominal, green across the board. The broadcast was simply gone. Protocol dictated a 5-minute grace period for atmospheric interference or transmitter malfunction. But Ben's gut, an instrument honed by a decade of listening to the world's whispers, told him this was different. This silence had weight. It felt deliberate, manufactured. He picked up the secure internal phone, a heavy black device with no dial pad, only speed dial buttons to other classified extensions. His hand, usually rock steady, felt slick with sweat as it clasped the cold bakelite. The call went to a single, unlisted extension designated only as Caesarea Deputy. A man named Gideon Raz answered on the first ring. He was in his sparsely furnished office, reviewing satellite imagery of Iranian naval movements in the Strait of Hormuz. He didn't say hello. His voice was gravelly, impatient, the sound of grinding stones. Report. Ben spoke the first part of the 3-part verbal authentication code, his own voice tight. The nightingale is silent. A pause stretched across the encrypted line, heavy with implication. Gideon's response was the countersign, devoid of emotion. Confirm time of last songbird. 8 days ago, 19 Zulu, Tuesday, Ben replied, completing the protocol. Another pause, then Gideon's final, chilling instruction. Initiate sundown protocol. Level 1, acknowledge. Acknowledged. Sundown 1, initiated. The line went dead. The countdown had begun. Phase 1. The prelude. The operation, codenamed Silent Scribe, was born from a catastrophic, paradigm-shifting failure. 8 months prior, Mossad's most sophisticated electronic surveillance network in Syria, a system of encrypted micro-repeaters and satellite uplinks codenamed Talon Grid, had gone dark. It wasn't a cascading malfunction. It was a systematic, targeted, and brutally efficient takedown. Over the course of a single night, from Damascus to Aleppo, the grid was dismantled, node by node, with a surgical precision that bespoke a terrifying new capability: Syrian counterintelligence. The Shubat al-Mukabarat al-Askariya, led by the infamous Colonel Fares al-Hamad, had rolled up the entire network. They hadn't just found the hardware. They had used a new generation of Russian-supplied passive electromagnetic field detectors, the SVAROG-3 system, technology Israel's Signals Intelligence Arm, Unit 8200, did not know they possessed. The Svarog didn't hunt for signals. It hunted for the faint, unique power signatures of the dormant electronic components themselves. The infinitesimal hum of a capacitor holding a charge, or the oscillation of a quartz crystal in standby mode. Al-Hamad's teams, driving specially equipped utility vans, had swept the cities block by block, not listening for transmissions, but mapping the electronic terrain like geologists searching for mineral deposits. They found every single node, from the repeater disguised as a loose stone in the wall of the Umayyad Mosque to the main uplink hidden in the air conditioning unit of a French diplomat's residence. The intelligence blackout was instantaneous and total. Israel was blind in Syria at the most critical time in a decade. A new intelligence assessment, Report 77B Alpha, landed on the Prime Minister's desk. It was a mosaic of terror, pieced together from a nervous Iranian defector in Baku, a Turkish arms dealer's intercepted call from an Istanbul hotel, and financial transaction monitoring that tracked Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps funds moving through shell corporations in Dubai to a North Korean state-owned enterprise, the Tanshan Commercial Bank. The whispers were of something called Project Scimitar. Syria, with significant North Korean technical assistance and Iranian funding, was building a series of underground, short-range ballistic missile silos. These were not old, liquid-fueled scuds that took hours to prepare. The specifications pointed to solid-fuel, rapid-launch missiles, likely the Hwasong-6 variant, with advanced TERCOM guidance systems capable of carrying chemical warheads loaded with VX nerve agent. The potential launch sites were buried deep in the dense urban sprawl surrounding Damascus, making a conventional airstrike impossible without thousands of civilian casualties and triggering a full-scale regional war. The strategic implication was dire. It would shift the balance of power in the region overnight, creating a direct, non-retaliable threat to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and the Dimona nuclear facility. Satellite imagery was useless. The construction was entirely subterranean, accessed through existing buildings, a state-owned bakery, a cement warehouse, a derelict textile factory. The North Korean engineers were operating under diplomatic cover, their movements shielded by diplomatic immunity. The failure of the Talon grid meant Israel's high-tech eyes and ears were gone. They were facing a strategic game-changer and had no assets on the ground to confirm its location, scale, or operational status. The genesis of Operation Silent Scribe was a single, desperate meeting in Gideon Raz's soundproof office, a room known as the Aquarium. The room contained Gideon, the head of Mossad, and a grim-faced IDF Major General from Amman, military intelligence. The general, a former fighter pilot named Eitan, paced the room, his frustration a palpable force. "We can level half of Damascus, but we might not even hit the target. The Americans are giving us nothing but hedge-your-bets analysis. We have chatter, we have suspicions, but we have nothing concrete. We need coordinates, Gideon. Not a zip code, not a neighborhood. We need a 10-digit grid reference for the command and control bunker. Without it, my hands are tied, and the Prime Minister is looking at a nightmare scenario he cannot win." Gideon understood. The mission couldn't just be to find the project. It had to be to pinpoint its brain. A surgical strike required a surgeon's precision. He laid out the concept for Silent Scribe, his voice a low counterpoint to the general's agitation. An agent on the ground, living a quiet, unremarkable life, an anchor in the city. "He will not actively seek intelligence," Gideon explained, leaning forward. "He will be a receiver, a clearinghouse. He will be a watchmaker, a network of low-level informants, janitors in the Ministry of Defense, truck drivers hauling cement, Ministry clerks filing procurement forms, people who saw things but didn't understand their significance, would be cultivated by other Mossad units operating out of Europe. They would feed information to a series of cutouts and dead drops. The watchmaker would be the one to collect it, piece it together, and understand its meaning. His job was to build the mosaic from 1,000 tiny, meaningless tiles. And his only way of sending that mosaic back to Tel Aviv would be a new, untraceable chemical communication system. The risk was enormous. If any single link in the chain was compromised, it would lead directly to the agent. Eitan stopped pacing. One man? You're betting the security of the state on one man fixing watches? I'm betting on the one variable Al-Hamad cannot model with an algorithm. Gideon replied, his gaze unwavering. Human discipline. We went too far with technology. We built a glass house and were surprised when our enemy threw stones. This is the answer. We go back to the basics. Back to the shadows. The plan was approved. The official objective was simple. Locate the command and control center of Project Scimitar and transmit its exact coordinates. The unofficial objective, known only to Gideon, was to prove that in the age of cyber warfare and satellite surveillance, the determined, disciplined human being remained the ultimate weapon. Phase 2. The Foundation. The man tasked with staring into this new darkness was Gideon Raz, Deputy Director of the Caesarea Department, Mossad's operational wing for running its human assets. Gideon was 58, with eyes that seemed to carry the accumulated weight of every failed operation and fallen agent of the last 30 years. His reputation was forged in the public fire of the 1997 attempt on Hamas leader Khalid Mashal in Amman, Jordan, an embarrassing failure involving a botched nerve agent application that had almost ended his career. He could still feel the humid Amman air, the frantic shouts in his earpiece. The plan had been elegant, high-tech. 2 agents posing as Canadian tourists would spray a derivative of fentanyl called levofentanyl into Mashal's ear. It was supposed to be untraceable, mimicking a heart attack. Gideon, the mission commander on the ground, watched from a surveillance van parked a block away. He saw his 2 agents approach Mashal on the crowded street. He saw the quick, almost imperceptible movement. Then chaos. Mashal's bodyguard, a massive man named Saeed, spun around, having seen the glint of the aerosol device. The chase was on. Gideon's heart hammered against his ribs as he listened to the panicked breathing of his agents over the comms. They were caught. A diplomatic firestorm erupted. King Hussein of Jordan threatening to sever ties and hang the captured agents unless Israel provided the antidote. Gideon had been forced to stand by as the antidote was handed over, saving the life of one of Israel's most wanted enemies and turning a covert operation into a global humiliation. He'd vowed then, in the sterile silence of the debriefing room, to never again place his faith in elegant, high-tech solutions that could fail in 100 unpredictable ways. For Gideon, the Talon Grid failure was a bitter confirmation of his deepest held belief. In the end, the only thing you could trust was the agent on the ground. The human element. His file on Colonel Al-Hamad was inches thick, bound in red leather. Al-Hamad, known in the intelligence community as the Ghost Hunter, was a new breed of Syrian intelligence officer. He held a degree in computer science from the Sorbonne and a master's in psychological warfare from a Russian GRU academy. He was fluent in French, English, and Russian, and utterly ruthless. He didn't use brute force and torture as a first resort. He used data analysis, pattern recognition, and game theory. He had dismantled the Talon Grid not by capturing an agent, but by analyzing municipal power grid fluctuations and mapping communication redundancies against them. He was Gideon's polar opposite and his technological equal. The geopolitical chessboard was on fire. While Silent Scribe was being conceived, other games were in play, creating a perilous operational environment. The CIA was running a messy operation out of the Bekaa Valley, codenamed Canyon Echo, arming a supposedly moderate militia that was, in reality, selling half its advanced Tau-2B anti-tank missiles to Hezbollah. The increased arms trafficking had led to a massive Syrian security clampdown on the Lebanese and Jordanian borders, sealing traditional Mossad infiltration and exfiltration routes, including the very crossing at Nasib that was designated as Asher's primary escape vector. Simultaneously, a French DGSE team was in Damascus running Operation Alouette, attempting to track the movements of the same North Korean scientists. Their aggressive and frankly clumsy electronic surveillance attempts, using high-powered directional antennas from their embassy, risked creating digital noise that could draw al-Hamad's attention to the very sector of the city Asher was operating in. To complicate matters further, Russia's SVR had embedded a counterintelligence team with al-Hamad's unit to advise on protecting their North Korean assets, effectively placing a second, highly competent adversary on the field. To Gideon, these rival operations were not allied efforts. They were dangerous variables, random pieces on the board that could knock over his own king at any moment. He was flying blind in a sky crowded with fools. The mission required an agent who could operate completely dark, with no electronic footprint, no broadcasts, no digital trail. The candidate chosen was Asher Lev. His file was deceptively thin, a testament to his skill in avoiding notice. A former Sayeret Matkal operator with a specialization in reconnaissance and sabotage, he had spent the last decade in deep cover readiness programs. A single action-oriented note in his file from a training exercise in the Negev desert stood out. It was a flashback, recalled by the exercise commander. The objective was for Asher to remain undetected for 72 hours in a small 2-square-kilometer patch of barren desert, while 2 full companies of Givati Brigade infantry with thermal imaging and drone support hunted him. Most operators were found within a day. Flashback. The sun beat down, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Asher lay motionless, buried in a shallow scrape beneath a thorny acacia bush. He had been there for 36 hours. His body screamed for water, for movement. Above, the buzz of a skylark drone was a constant, predatory insect whine. He watched its shadow pass over him. He could hear the crunch of boots, the low murmur of voices. A squad of Givati soldiers, their tavers held at the ready, were sweeping the area. They were less than 10 meters away. Asher's training took over. He slowed his breathing, a 4-count in, an 8-count out. He focused on the rhythm, forcing his heart rate down, lowering his body temperature by a fraction of a degree, just enough to blur his heat signature against the sun-baked earth. One of the soldiers stopped, kicking at a loose rock near Asher's head. Dust puffed into the air. Asher didn't flinch. His world had shrunk to the space behind his eyelids. He was not a man. He was a stone, a piece of the landscape. After an eternity, the squad leader gave a hand signal, and they moved on. Asher remained buried. After the 72 hours were up, he walked into the command tent and placed a stone on the general's map table. He had spent the final day in a hole less than 50 meters from their position, breathing through a concealed tube. The general later wrote, "It was as if he willed himself out of existence. He does not hide. He vanishes." His legend, his fabricated backstory, was that of Kamal al-Jamil, a third-generation watchmaker from a respected family that had fled Aleppo during the Civil War. It was a masterpiece of detail, created by Mossad's Q branch. It included forged Ottoman-era birth certificates, land deeds for property that no longer existed, and even faded silver halide family photographs created using period-correct cameras and chemical processes. Asher's skill was not just espionage, it was micromechanics. But for this mission, his primary skill was patience. He was chosen because his psychological profile showed an unprecedented capacity for enduring extreme monotony and isolation without degradation of cognitive function. He could sit in a room for 12 hours a day, hunched over a watch movement, and not go mad. He could live a life of crushing, repetitive boredom that would serve as the perfect camouflage. The final piece of the operational puzzle was the communication method. With electronic means comprehensively compromised, Gideon turned to the alchemist, Dr. Ilara Vogel, of Mossad's Biochemical Warfare and Countermeasures Division. Vogel was a prodigy, a chemist who thought in terms of operational security. She despised traditional invisible inks, lemon juice, phenolphthalein, as amateurish relics easily defeated by heat or ultraviolet light. She presented Gideon with her life's work, a binary chemical agent she called Stibine 9. It wasn't an ink. It was a complete covert communication system. In a demonstration in Gideon's soundproof office, she took a clean sheet of paper. Standard forensic analysis checks for two things, she explained, her voice crisp and academic. Residual compounds on the paper, or physical indentations left by the writing implement. She held up a small vial of clear liquid. This is Stibine 9. It's a complex organometallic compound based on an antimony isotope. Once applied, it forms a covalent bond with the cellulose fibers. Chemically, it becomes part of the paper. There is no residue. She then dipped a goose quill into the liquid and wrote a sentence on the sheet. The paper remained blank. She handed it to Gideon. He ran his fingers over it. Nothing. Now for the magic, Vogel said, placing the paper inside a small, portable briefcase attached to a canister and a fiber optic cable. The secret is the developer. The writing can only be revealed when the paper is exposed to a specific, patented chemical vapor, developer 7G, and simultaneously illuminated by a narrow-band krypton laser at a precise wavelength of 407.3 nanometers. She flipped a switch. A low hum filled the room. The laser's specific photon energy excites the antimony isotope, causing it to fluoresce just long enough for a hyperspectral camera to capture the image. On a small screen built into the briefcase, the sentence she had written appeared in sharp, glowing green letters. The ghost is in the machine. Without the vapor and the exact frequency of light, the message was undetectable. It was analog, untraceable, and relied on chemistry, not physics. It was Gideon Raz's answer to Colonel Al-Hamad's digital ghost hunting. Phase 3. The core. Asher Lev's insertion was a study in banality. He didn't cross a border at night. He flew into Beirut International Airport as Kamal al-Jamil, a watchmaker returning to the Levant after a supposed 2-year apprenticeship at the prestigious Wastep Institute in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. His papers were perfect, aged and weathered by a Mossad forgery unit that used custom-grown bacteria and specific UV light exposure to replicate authentic wear. He spent 3 weeks in Beirut, establishing his public presence at watch enthusiast meetups, before taking a shared taxi to Damascus. He paid the exorbitant bribes at the Mossad border checkpoint with a weary sigh and a perfectly rehearsed complaint about government corruption, just like any other Syrian citizen. He rented a small shop in the Al-Hamidiyya Souk, a place that smelled of cardamom, tanned leather, and centuries of history. It was perfect. The shop came with a small Spartan apartment above it. For 6 months, he did nothing but fix watches. He established a routine. He opened his shop at 9, closed at 6. He drank tea with neighboring merchants. He prayed at the local Umayyad mosque on Fridays. He became a familiar, unremarkable part of the neighborhood fabric. He was the quiet man who was good with his hands. During this time, the intelligence network was being built around him, a web he himself was not privy to. A series of dead drops were established, a loose brick in the ancient wall of the citadel of Damascus, a specific hollowed-out copy of the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun in the Damascus University Library, the underside of a particular marble table at the Al-Nawfara Cafe. Information flowed into these drops. A list of specialized tungsten carbide drill bits purchased by a shell company. A truck driver's log showing multiple off-the-books trips to a warehouse in the Gawata district. A low-level government clerk's observation that a certain Iranian Revolutionary Guard general always turned off his satellite phone before entering that same warehouse. Each piece of information was collected by a cleaner, a Mossad support agent posing as a tourist or businessman, who would then pass it to Asher through a second layer of dead drops, usually disguised as shipments of watch parts or tools from a supplier in Germany. Asher's job was to synthesize. He would take the raw data and, using detailed city maps and his own limited passive observations, build the picture. The first successful message was sent 2 months into the operation. It was a simple confirmation of the primary suspect location. Asher mixed the 2 parts of the stibine-9 compound. The liquid was clear as water. He used a fine-tipped goose quill, not a metal nib pen, to avoid leaving any indentation on the paper. He wrote his report on the back of a shipping invoice for watch crystals. The message detailed the increased activity at the Ghouta warehouse and the presence of what he believed were Korean-speaking technical advisors. He then placed the invoice into a standard envelope and mailed it to a holding address in Cyprus. From Cyprus, it was flown by diplomatic pouch to Tel Aviv. In Alara Vogel's lab, the invoice was placed in a sealed, lead-lined chamber. The developer 7G vapor was pumped in. The krypton laser was activated. And like a photograph developing in a darkroom, the neat, precise lines of Asher's handwriting bloomed into existence on the paper. The system worked. Gideon Raz allowed himself a brief, thin smile. The ghost was in the machine. The technology was both brilliant and terrifyingly fragile. Stibine-9 was a triumph of organic chemistry, but it had an Achilles heel that nearly derailed the entire operation. The 2 precursor chemicals used to create the ink were inert and stable on their own. Asher stored them in vials disguised as 1-dip and LNR watch cleaning solutions. However, once mixed, the stibine-9 compound had a half-life of only 6 hours. After that, it would break down at a molecular level, the antimony isotope becoming permanently bonded to the cellulose and rendered undevelopable. This meant Asher had a 6-hour window from the moment he mixed the ink to write his message and get it into the mail drop. It created a constant, running clock on every communication. The first major setback occurred 4 months into the operation. A series of 3 messages from Asher arrived in Tel Aviv. But when Alara Vogel placed them in the development chamber, they were unreadable. Faint, ghostly lines would appear for a split second under the laser and then vanish into the paper. The information was irretrievably lost. Vogel was distraught. She ran diagnostics on the laser, recalibrated the vapor concentration, even analyzed the paper for contaminants. Nothing. The problem wasn't in Tel Aviv. It had to be in Damascus. "It's the heat," she announced 2 days later in the aquarium, pointing to a complex molecular diagram on the screen. The tertiary butyl groups that are supposed to shield the antimony's reactive core are shearing off due to thermal agitation. Damascus is hitting 35 degrees. In his apartment, it's probably closer to 40. The precursors are degrading before he even mixes them. The ink is essentially inert by the time he uses it. "So what's the solution?" Gideon asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I can synthesize a new stabilizing agent, a fluorinated polymer chain that's more heat-resistant. But it will take a week, and then we have to get it to him. We're blind for at least 2 weeks, maybe more." A young case officer named Yael snapped. "He's transmitting intel on the warehouse ventilation system. It could give us a clue to the underground depth. And it's turning to dust." A new plan was devised, codenamed Operation Weaver. Mossad located a rug merchant in Istanbul who did regular business in Damascus. He was a Scion, a Jewish diaspora volunteer who helped the agency out of a sense of duty. He was tasked with delivering a specific, hand-woven Tabriz prayer rug to Kamal al-Jamil's shop, an apparent gift from a distant relative. Vogel's team, in a process that took 72 hours of painstaking work with atomic force microscopes and microsyringes, injected the new liquid chemical precursors directly into the hollow cores of the rug's individual wool fibers. The rug would smell like wool and dye, nothing more. But Asher had to be told how to extract it. The following Tuesday, the Nightingale broadcast was altered. In the third bar of the melody, a single note was flattened by a half step, a prearranged signal for Check Protocol 7. Asher, listening intently in his shop, understood. Protocol 7 referred to a specific method of chemical extraction using a common solvent, acetone, found in nail polish remover. He would know to soak a specific, color-coded corner of the rug to extract the new formula. The tension in Tel Aviv was unbearable as the rug made its journey by truck. It was stopped at Syrian customs. The crate was opened. The rug was unrolled, inspected by a bored officer who ran his hands over its intricate patterns, and then, mercifully, waved through. The resupply was a success, but 2 weeks of vital intelligence had been lost forever. Just as the flow of information resumed, the second complication struck, and it was far worse. Asher's primary intelligence source on Project Scimitar was a disgruntled supply clerk in the Syrian Ministry of Defense, codenamed Cassius. Cassius was not an ideologue. He was a gambler with deep debts, recruited by a Mossad case officer in a casino in Cyprus. He had provided the manifests for the tungsten drill bits and the cement shipments. But one evening, he was picked up by the Mukhabarat, not for espionage, but for a petty smuggling ring he was running on the side. The news hit the aquarium like a grenade. Asher was immediately ordered to suspend all dead drops. The debate in Gideon's office was furious. Yael argued for an immediate extraction, her voice sharp with urgency. "The chain is broken, Gideon. Cassius will talk. They'll peel him like an onion. It's only a matter of time before they connect him to the dead drops and start shaking the tree." Asher is exposed. Gideon stared at the map of Damascus on his wall, his face a mask of stone. "No," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Al-Hamad isn't onto us. This is random noise, a background crime. If we pull Asher now, 18 months of work, our only eyes on Scimitar, are gone. We wait. We watch." He was betting the entire operation, and Asher's life, on his understanding of his adversary. He believed Al-Hamad was too sophisticated to be distracted by a low-level smuggler unless he already had a reason to look closer. To pull the plug now would be to react to a ghost, to spook its shadows. They waited for 3 agonizing weeks. Then Cassius was released. He had been beaten, but he had only confessed to his smuggling operation. He was fired from his job and placed under surveillance. He was no longer a viable asset. He was a liability, a potential tripwire that could bring the whole operation down. The primary source of intelligence was gone. Then came the third complication, the one that threatened to burn everything to the ground. A new figure appeared at the Gouda warehouse. a senior Iranian nuclear scientist named Dr. Reza Mohammadi. Mohammadi was not on any watch list related to Scimitar. He was supposed to be in Tehran, working on Iran's civilian nuclear program. His presence in Damascus meant only one thing. Scimitar was not just a chemical weapons project. They were trying to weaponize a nuclear device. The timeline had just accelerated from years to months. Simultaneously, a new threat emerged. A ghost from Gideon's own past. A report from a Mossad source inside Jordanian General Intelligence landed on his desk. Colonel al-Hamad had recently hired a foreign consultant for his counter-espionage unit, a retired Jordanian GID officer named Major Zaid. Gideon felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He knew Zaid. Zaid was the meticulous, clever officer who had run the investigation into the Khaled Mashal affair in Amman all those years ago. He didn't know Asher, but he knew Gideon. He knew his tradecraft, his preference for deep cover legends, his methods for building networks. For the first time, Gideon was not just playing against al-Hamad, he was playing against a man who had studied his own failures. The pressure from the Prime Minister's office became unbearable. They needed the coordinates, and they needed them now. But with Cassius out of the picture, Asher's flow of intelligence had dried up to a trickle. He needed a new source inside the project itself. Gideon authorized the most dangerous move of the entire operation. Asher was to attempt to recruit a new asset directly. The target was a Syrian civil engineer named Omar al-Khatib, who worked for the state construction company and had been seconded to the Ghouta project. Mossad's research division had built a deep psychological profile on him, a compromised